Hi everyone. I wanted to come on here because in thinking about the program that's coming up, the 30-hour Ayurvedic yoga course, and just kind of thinking more and more about how to explain and describe why teaching yoga and trying to use it to balance dosha is not really useful, and then just from an Ayurvedic perspective, one of the reasons why, and looking at it from a yogic paradigm, why it's not really beneficial to identify with a dosha. And it reminded me of this shloka from the Bhagavad Gītā. It's from chapter 2, verse 47. And it's the shloka that reads, "You have a right to perform your dharma, like your prescribed actions for life, but we are not entitled to the fruits of those actions. And we don't want to be, like, we can use the fruits of those actions as goals, but we don't really take ownership or create identification with those things because it kind of creates a sticky point in our development." And then the shloka continues, "Never consider yourself to be the cause of the result of your activities or be attached to inaction." So we're supposed to do action, but not for the sake of it. I wanted to just try and chant the shloka, and then I'll go into the comparative with Ayurveda. So, Karmani eva tikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phale hetubhur ma te sangostva karmani. So again, that's shloka 47 from chapter 2 in the Bhagavad Gītā. So in terms of how this relates to Ayurveda, dosha is a collection of guna, of quality. So vata is kind of a grander term, meaning the sum of its parts. Same with pitta, same with kapha, same with vata pitta, vata kapha, kapha pitta, whatever, you get it. So it's a combination of the sum of its parts, which means if we're really going to ever try and amend anything or balance dosha, you can't balance the sum. You have to break it apart again and balance the parts, which is also what we're doing in yoga. We're trying to find balance between these opposite qualities of ha and ta, of solar and lunar energies. We can't just do yoga, we have to do the parts. But how this relates to, for me anyway, this shloka from the Bhagavad Gītā 2:47 is that if we identify with the dosha, which kapha comes because of actions that engage with those qualities, that put more of them in the body in excess, or in an environment that has that in excess plus our activities. So like, for example, drinking coconut water in the spring, it's like really redundant, right? Because the spring is kind of like the embodiment of coconut water, for example. And so drinking coconut water in the spring is too much of the gunas that create kapha. And so in some people who already have that, or because of how intense the spring is, for perhaps, they start to have this kapha overload, but they're not experiencing kapha, they're experiencing the gunas, the qualities of kapha, because the senses can't experience a dosha. The senses experience the qualities of the dosha, which then let the brain know, oh, that's kapha, right? So you're not like, oh, I have kapha coming out of my eyes or my nose. You say, I have like this slimy, pale, sticky stuff coming out of my nose and my eyes or my mouth or whatever, right? And that we know from those qualities creates kapha. So there are a couple of issues here. One is that kapha is like an end result. So just by simply identifying ourselves with a dosha, like I'm a kapha person or a pitta vata person or whatever, we're actually identifying ourselves with the actions, the combined actions of those gunas, right? Which then specifically takes us away from the process of yoga, as Krishna is illuminating in 247. So even though it's something that's kind of passive, we're still identifying with it, and then it already takes us off the path of yoga, and it also takes us off the path of healing via Ayurveda. So when we're thinking about dosha clinically, like just in our terms of health and separate from yoga, we have to remember that you cannot be a dosha. And if you identify with a dosha, it means you're identifying with an imbalance aspect of collected substance inside you. You know, you would never say, I'm like a runny nose person. That would be weird. And also, why would you want to identify as that, you know? You want to identify as a person who happens to have a runny nose. So similarly, you're a person who may be suffering from excess kapha, or you may be suffering from excess vata, or some combination, and it will change throughout your life. And sometimes we feel like it's really static in us because we've had these issues for a long time, but we don't want to identify with the collection of action, because it will mean, from a clinical standpoint, it will mean that we're not going to try and fix it. We'll just try and cover the symptoms so that we feel more comfortable, which is not healing, right? So from an Ayurvedic perspective, it takes us away from the process of healing and kind of degrades the point. And from a yogic perspective, it says something very similar, but it's psychological, and it makes us feel like we are that thing. We are the collection of activities. And it creates a stuck point in our spiritual maturation because we identify as that thing and we do things from that new center. So what it does is it takes our awareness of neutrality and moves it to this doshic state. So now, like, my center is when I'm expressing qualities of kapha, I'm myself. But that means we're creating an external identity, and so we're not actually ourselves. We're deluding ourselves to feel this way. This is something that we're going to be talking about in the 30-hour course, because the śloka 116 talks about how you have to overcome guna to find self-realization, essentially. And shlokas previously, I think it's 1.8 and 1.9, talks about two of the different varieties of delusion that comes up, and one of them is verbal delusion, which means, like, we tell ourselves that something is happening when it's not, which creates a lot of confusion, obviously. I think we can see that in the United States political spectrum right now, right? Where people will say things and it's not actually happening. I mean, it's called gaslighting, but then we end up gaslighting ourselves. So when we identify with a dosha, that's kind of what we're doing. Because we're saying that if a dosha has like a positive or negative value, I want to be more vata, or I want to be more pitta, or I am vata, or I am pitta. And so, like, when I'm expressing those excessive qualities, I am myself. But yoga teaches us that you are not the sum of your actions. You are not a dosha. You are a person having an experience of those things, and then you get to decide if those experiences are bringing you toward a sense of neutral state, the state of yoga, where there is no kapha, and there is no pitta, and there is no vata. So first of all, from a yogic perspective, dosha is external to the experience of the soul. We're trying to balance dosha from an Ayurvedic perspective to make the soul, sattva, and the purusha more apparent, because it's going to be covered. It's covering the experience, it's covering the senses, and so it's really hard to perceive things that are subtle when we're, like, inundated with a stuffy nose, for example. So that's just what I wanted to talk about, that the shloka 247 reminds us that when we're practicing Ayurvedic yoga, we're not balancing dosha, ever. There is no way you're going to balance dosha and actually, like, heal yourself from an imbalance of dosha through asana. It's very unlikely. And then secondly, we want to make sure that when we're practicing Ayurvedic yoga or yoga in general, we're not identifying with this collection of action, which, you know, it's very small. Like I was saying earlier, it's very small in that, like, these are the qualities that make kapha appear. These are the qualities that make vata appear or make it known. These are the qualities that make pitta appear or make it known. But that is not to be identified with. It's just like a marking point to allow us to know what's happening. It just creates orientation. But if we start to identify with the place of orientation, we get stuck there. And then we'll start to develop a new center around that point. And this is verbal delusion, because we're going to think we're neutral, but we're actually shifted to the right or to the left or whatever. So I wanted to just bring that to our attention. because I find it really fascinating. It's really interesting how the mind can just get stuck on things and build a whole universe of neutrality around that, right? But then we're building a house around a shifty foundation, so it's not stable. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to send me a direct message. You can also type them here, and I'll be posting this on the website soon too. Okay, thank you. Bye.